Dear Virginia Foster, dear David Raoul Foster, dear members of David William Foster's family, dear guests and colleagues, I'm Nina Berman, Director of the School of International Letters and Cultures, and would like to welcome you to this memorial service for our dear friend and colleague, and of course beloved husband, father, grandfather, and more, David William Foster, who passed away last year on June 24th. We have gathered here today to pay tribute to an extraordinary human being and scholar, a real mensch and outstanding mind. Before we hear from our first speaker, let me thank especially President Laddie Core and Dean Cohen for being with us today. I would also like to thank Carmen Urioste Azcora, David Parks, Ajitesh Goyal, Enrique Martin Bonville, and Gayatri Thambare for arranging the various elements of this event. Two announcements I would like to make. For one, thanks to the tireless efforts of Sinead Valiant, we presently have an exhibit of David's scholarly works at the library. So the David William Foster exhibit, scholar, mentor, and friend of the library, is now open for public viewing. Foster worked closely with the Latin American specialists in the ASU library to build research collections related to cultural studies in Argentina and Brazil especially. Among his publications are over 50 book-length, single-authored critical studies, bibliographies and anthologies, more than 36 edited and co-edited anthologies, and numerous articles and translations. To commemorate David Foster's pioneering scholarship and giving spirit, the Hayden Library exhibit combines a short biography, shelves of the books written by Foster, and photographs from his life. This exhibit is open to all during regular library hours. So thank you, Sinead, and we have Jim O'Donnell here as well, representing the library. Thank you so much for making this possible. And then, thanks to the generosity of David's wife, Virginia Ramos Foster, we now also have an endowed lecture in David's name, the David William Foster Memorial Lecture. It will take place every year in the fall and feature a speaker who is related in one way or another to David's research agenda. So thank you very much, Virginia, for your tremendous generosity, which continues the giving ASU has received from the Foster family over many years. And as a demonstration of Silk's and ASU appreciation, the graduate student, for this sustained record of giving, the Graduate Student Lounge in our renovated Durham Hall building was named after David. So it's now the David William Foster Graduate Student Lounge on the 4th floor of Durham Hall. So if you have a chance, if you haven't seen it, the plaques were just installed yesterday. And we also have a couple of one photograph of David and then actually a poster that features David. So it's a very wonderful way to remember him. Yeah, and I would like to thank Alan Sandler from the foundation and everybody who was involved in that process to make that happen, that we had this named Graduate Student Lounge. So, just a note to our speakers. If you just move a little bit away from this microphone, like for example like this, or you move like that, or you move like that, we can't hear you. So it may be the best to either do what I'm doing, speak directly into this microphone, or to take it out of the stand and then hold it. So I just wanted to, this is especially for the speakers, but I've been at many events in this room where people suddenly talk over here and then you don't hear them anymore. So with that, I would like to announce our first speaker, ASU President Michael Crow.
Hi, Michael Crow here. It's really a great moment in the passing of David Foster, 55 years of service to ASU, unbelievable academic, unbelievable scholar, certainly one of the great faculty members ever to be at Arizona State University, who's helped us lay down the foundations for the university, what a true scholar really means, what a true Renaissance person really means. And so David will be missed, but his service to the institution, his service to the broader society, his multicultural perspectives, his advancement of the tremendous outcomes in our Spanish program and in other languages has just been fantastic. So I just want to just weigh in on behalf of the entire university community to honor David, to recognize David for all of his achievements, and to just recognize what a great person has passed on. So thank you.
So you did not see this on your programs because we just received this message this morning in true ASU fashion. So, but we're so glad to have this message. So with that, I would like our first speaker, Alberto Rios, to come to the podium. Alberto Rios, poet and professor at Arizona State University.
Thank you, Nina. And Virginia, members of the Foster family, and everyone, I want to echo what Nina was saying. Welcome, everybody. Bienvenidos todos. Bienvenido. Bienvenu. Bienvenuto. Willkommen. Croeso, that's Welsh. Aloha, shalom, salam, yatheh. So many ways to say so simple a thing, you'd think that as human beings, we could have gotten this straight by now. But we're all different. We're all different, and I take that as a good thing. And so did David Foster. David Foster was different. He lived it, he traveled it, he breathed it, he taught it. It mattered to him, and he helped it matter to others. On this happy, sad day, I've written a poem for him that I'd like to read. And I want to say that I would gather every 5 years, over the years, there was a very special gathering of how long you've worked at ASU. And every 5 years, we would gather, and David ended up teaching, I believe, 54 years at ASU, and I've only been here 40. He used to tease me, but it was in the realm of marvelous accomplishment, and those accomplishments were his. This poem is called "The Voice at the Front of the Room" for David William Foster, and it begins with an epigraph that was his signature file. Voy a la calle, tengo os pés chagados, pelos espinhos da rua. Most people walk through the city and never see it. Entre espinas, crepúsculos, pisando. In the man of the world, we find the world of the man. Inside, David Foster was made of cities. He had sidewalks for arteries, boulevards next to veins. Man of his own, husband, father, teacher, traveler, he stood on the solid ground of so many worlds. So easily said, but so hard to do. He simply and steadfastly imagined, then forged forward headstrong into that imagination to bring back treasure. And it was treasure maps he taught from, not lesson plans. He did not ask that his students read a book, but instead that they see that the words on those pages were little pieces of the places themselves. He taught for so many years, then taught for so many more, guided by maps and spaces, buildings and songs, food and photographs. When and where there was pain in the worlds he cherished, he shone a light. He spoke up. He wrote books. To colleagues, to friends, to family, time was not his measure. Joy was. His smile was as long and as steady as the rivers he had seen. When he laughed, his eyes laughed in concert with his mouth. A rhyme of long life and vivid moment, 54 years of teaching, 54 years of learning, his love of the moments that made those years unwavering, saying yes 1,000,000 times over to the best of everything and everyone. Thank you all.
We will now hear from Naomi Lindstrom from the University of Texas at Austin, a former student of David's.
Hello, this is Naomi Lindstrom. My dissertation was one of the first ones that David Foster supervised after he established the PhD program in Spanish at ASU. David was my mentor for about 50 years, and in many ways he still is my mentor. I'm here to talk about David's contribution in the field of Jewish Latin American studies. David was attracted to the study of marginalized or outsider groups. In the case of his research, this included LGBTQ, women, Chicanos, and Jews. He made a point of supporting emerging areas of research, so he was attracted to the fledgling Latin American Jewish Studies Association, known as LACSA, and eventually became its president between 2006 and 2009. He enthusiastically participated in LACSA conferences and related events, and he organized 2 LACSA International Research Conferences. In 2007 at the Biblioteca Nacional in Buenos Aires, and in 2011 at ASU in conjunction with Jewish Studies at ASU. In his own writing, David focused on literary writers such as Ana Maria Shua, but also on Jewish photographers such as Marcelo Borodsky. He combined his Jewish concerns with this fascination with photography that he developed late in his career. Over the years, David taught several courses on Latin American Jewish topics. On 2 occasions, he offered NEH summer seminars in Buenos Aires on the topic of Jewish life in Buenos Aires. He was also a translator of the work of Latin American Jewish authors, including Moacir Sclio, Marcos Aguinis, and Ana Maria Shua, with whom he maintained an intellectual friendship. While David wrote articles on Jewish themes, in my view, he made his greatest impact in this area by encouraging Latin Americanist literary and cultural critics who were just venturing into Latin American Jewish studies. Just as he was drawn to marginalized communities, David was impelled to support small and off-the-beaten-track areas of study. While scholars might be understandably apprehensive about becoming part of a field viewed as somewhat peripheral to Jewish studies and to Latin American studies, being a highly established and visible figure, David was able to help anchor the field. The multi-authored critical anthology that he coordinated, Latin American Jewish Cultural Production, is an icon of his presidency of LACSA, and it's a testimony to his eagerness to collaborate with scholars of Latin American Jewish culture. I personally believe that when we're able to take a longer, retrospective look, the long view at David and his remarkable career, what we will see is that his impact was made equally by his own writing and by the encouragement that he provided to other scholars.
Our next speaker is Juana Suarez from the Tisch School of the Arts at New York University, also a former student of David's.
Thank you so much, Nina. I'll try to be obedient with the microphone. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you, Virginia, everybody at ASU organizing. Buenas tardes, todas, todos y todes. I had been asked to celebrate David William Foster's work in the area of photography, but it would be awkward to speak about his intellectual contributions without tending to the legacy he has left for many of us as a human being, a professor, and a mentor. David was the director of my PhD dissertation and my academic advisor. From the moment that he saw me, he said, "This is the time to write about Colombian cinema. Colombians are making films from the barricades." This is by the year 1998, when the conflict was extremely aggravated. And I think it's amazing how something that an advisor might tell you might change forever your academic profile and your life. He was a true mentor, a person of intuition and endless generosity with his students who love great conversations. With him, I learned that graduate school is about cultivating independent and mature thinkers. There was always empathy and support, even when I told him that I was not going to sacrifice happiness for tenure. He mailed me back and shared the many projects and interests he was cooking and added a postdata. By the way, you will land on your feet. That's precisely what I did. I didn't sacrifice my happiness for tenure, and I quit. I jumped without a parachute after I got tenure and went to another place, did another MA, and revamped my academic career again. And when David learned that I was directing the Moving Image Archiving and Preservation program at NYU, he was absolutely supportive and very happy that I have done that. Foster was a pioneer and a visionary in many topics that became relevant years later in Latin American cultural, literary, and film studies, queer cultures, urban studies, gender studies, Jewish studies, and many other fields. By mentioning his intellectual legacy in photography, we are talking about how he taught many of us to look at the world from a different angle, how he directed our gaze from the works of Horacio Coppola, Graciela Iturbide, and Mariana Jampolsky to a myriad of Brazilian, Argentinian, Chicano, Chicana, Chicane, Mexican, and Guatemalan photographers who, like him, were thinking avant la lettre about feminism, queer culture, post-masculinities, urban studies, and many other topics. Thanks, David, for making us see and read against the current. I have a hard time using the past tense here. Foster's presence in my academic life has been so determinant that it is difficult to grasp he is no longer here. I know many of his former students feel the same, honoring the sense of community that was always so important for him to foster. I would like to also pay tribute to David's students that we had lost in the last year. My dear roommate, Rocio Humanes, and also Cristina Guso and David Muñoz. Rest in peace, dear Foster. You will be remembered. I will always be grateful for helping me become an independent, strong, and brave researcher, as well as a better professor and human being. Thank you. Whoever is next, please accommodate the microphone. Now, it's a very tall person.
And now a message from Buenos Aires by Ana Maria Schua, writer and critic.
Bueno, yo soy Ana María Schua. No voy a poder hablarles mucho acerca de los estudios de literatura latinoamericana de David, porque bueno, yo soy una autora de ficción, leo poco ensayo, realmente no conozco la obra de David en profundidad. yo era amiga de David. David cada vez que venía a la Argentina venía a casa. A él le gustaba tanto la carne argentina como caminar por Buenos Aires. Así que bueno, siempre le dábamos un buen lomo a la parrilla, que se comía con muchas ganas. Y charlábamos, por supuesto, de cosas personales y también de sus proyectos. Él me hablaba mucho, bueno, de su mujer, que fue su compañera y su querida esposa a lo largo de toda su vida, algo realmente muy particular en el caso de David, que además era gay militante y que andaba por el mundo fundando cátedras de estudios gay, que hoy serían cátedras de estudios LGBTI, sin duda. Me hablaba de Davidcito con mucho orgullo y mucho cariño, y tenía una gran admiración por su nuera también, mucho respeto y admiración. Hablábamos por supuesto también de sus proyectos y de las cosas que él estaba haciendo, no solo de literatura latinoamericana, sino de todo, porque bueno, David era un curioso absoluto, todo le interesaba, no había un hecho cultural que David no tuviera ganas de conocer, de investigar, de analizar. Últimamente, por ejemplo, en Argentina él estaba muy, muy fascinado con el teatro argentino, y dentro de lo que es el teatro, siempre le interesó lo más disruptivo, lo que rompía los esquemas, lo más loco, raro, divertido, porque además, bueno, él tenía un maravilloso sentido del humor y de la ironía. Algo que nos hacía mucho a los escritores argentinos era hacernos poner celosos con los brasileros, y siempre decía, ¿por qué no me habré dedicado a la literatura brasilera desde el principio en lugar de la literatura argentina? Pero yo creo que lo hacía a propósito, lo hacía para hacernos sufrir un poquito. Eso era David, no había algo que fuera indiferente para él y que no le interesara en materia cultural. Él conocía todos los museos, conocía todas las calles de Buenos Aires, le interesaba muchísimo la fotografía, todas las novedades que se estaban produciendo en cada área. Por supuesto, estaba al tanto siempre de las últimas novedades en literatura de ficción, la novela, el cuento, el microrrelato. Yo sabía también de su interés en la literatura mexicana, de sus traducciones. Compartía conmigo los nombres de los autores que más le interesaban y de los que había traducido sus novelas. Eso era David para mí, ¿no? Era un amigo muy querido, que llenaba mi casa de alegría de vivir cuando venía, y de entusiasmo y de ganas de hacer de ganas de vivir. Así era David.
And now Charles St. George from Denison University, also a former student of David's.
I have the opposite problem. Good afternoon, friends of Foster. There are so many of us here and so many of us around the world. This became apparent to me when the news of his passing sent shockwaves throughout the Americas and beyond. And I was left as the main contact for Chasqui, the journal he had edited for a quarter century. I had been his right-hand man for 6 years, serving as production editor. Email after email poured in from the Southern Cone, from Brazil, Mexico, Europe, from seemingly countless colleagues at North American universities. Each one attested to the colossal impact he had and will continue having on Latin American cultural and literary studies. Some had working relationships with him stretching back decades. Others had met him at conferences, and still others had never met him at all, except through email exchanges. But there were two recurring themes in all of the condolences that I received. One was the exceptional kindness with which he treated people, regardless of how great or humble their standing in the field. How many scholars achieve David William Foster levels of name recognition and still manage to not only be personable and approachable, but attentive and supportive to the point of immediately answering emails as a matter of basic protocol? He signed many of his emails with servidor, and that always struck me as someone who had learned so much of the world through him that he would still refer to himself this way, but I think that speaks volumes of his character and just the way that he operated in the field and in the world. Foster's friendly and timely responses went a long way in solidifying the reputation of the journal he left as part of his legacy. Where many journals went about their business with the cold detachment and perpetual lethargy that are notorious for leaving scholars in limbo for years at a time, chronically unsure of the status of their manuscript and when or whether it might eventually be published, Foster was determined that things could and should be done differently. This was especially important in the case of pre-tenure scholars whose careers laid precipitously at the mercy of the timelines and whims of the journals to which they had entrusted their manuscripts. Rather than resting on his gigantic laurels, and those had to be very comfortable laurels, he was ever mindful of the needs and vulnerabilities of junior colleagues and worked tirelessly to support them in pragmatic ways and offered prompt feedback and workable timelines, while simultaneously maintaining rigorous academic standards. As someone who had already benefited from his mentorship during all 8 of my years as a grad student here at ASU, it was after I left Tempe through my work with him on Chasqui that I came to realize the amount of daily time that he dedicated to mentoring scholars all around the world. And it is worth noting that he was particularly concerned with engaging with academics young and old in Latin America and maintaining the journal's visibility and accessibility throughout the continent. Which leads me to the other recurring theme in the condolences I received last year, which was his inexhaustible support for academic inquiry into the region that he loved so much, especially when it came to expanding scholarship in areas that had historically been disregarded or even silenced. While the themes published in Chasqui over the arc of its half-century of existence have generally followed larger trends in scholarship on Latin America, a significant shift can be noted in the years immediately following his ascent to editor in 1995. Since its founding in 1972, the full name of the journal has reflected its emphasis on literature, Revista de Literatura Latinoamericana. Anyone who has taken or taught an introductory course on Latin American literature cannot deny that throughout the vast majority of its 500-year history, the canon has been dominated by men of mainly European descent, assumed to be unproblematically heterosexual when they did not overtly claim such an identity. Certainly, any academics investigating outside these parameters were operating at the margins of traditional scholarship. Under Foster's guidance, Chasqui's scope quickly expanded to include a vast array of cultural studies that would promote subject matter and theoretical approaches that included and reflected increasing diversity in the field. I did a little bit of archival work to help demonstrate this point. In the May issue from 1994, 1 year prior to Foster's taking of the editorial reins, of the 10 articles published, all of them dealt with literature, and only one seemed to deviate from the traditional norms that I have just described. The same pattern holds true for the 12 articles published in the November 94 issue, all dealing with literature, with just one outlier where gender was concerned. After the transition in editorship in 1995, at least half of the articles in both issues from 1996 dealt with authors or subject matter that branched out from the traditional demographic. By 97, just under half of the articles in both issues involved cultural studies beyond the realm of literature. Now, this was by no means a declaration of war against the canon. Like Foster himself in both his scholarship and his teaching, Chasqui continued to passionately promote work on traditional literature, but it became a leading venue for expanding and more inclusive academic inquiry into Latin America. Foster's commitment to push Latin American scholarship beyond the disciplinary boundaries that he inherited created lasting change in the field. Of this there is no doubt. But Chasqui is one important example of how his love for and dedication to Nuestra Querida America has created a legacy that continues to support and inspire generations of scholars throughout the world. Thank you.
Patrick Gridge from Virginia Tech University, also a former student of David's.
Okay. All right, first of all, I want to thank Nina, Carmen, Cynthia, Silk, the Foster family, Virginia, a todos, no, por invitarme, for inviting me to speak on for Foster, and particularly gender studies, masculinity studies, feminist perspectives, and all of that he covered. It's when Carmen sent me, or sent all of us the email, I guess 2 or 3 months ago, she said emphatically 5 minutes, period. That's how you have it. And it's like, how do you cover what Foster has done in his career in 5 minutes? How do I, how can I comment on his legacy, his scholar contributions, particularly in the field of gender studies, masculinity, queer theory, sexuality? How's that possible? You think about his CV, you look at his CV, it's like 14 pages long, something like, I counted I think Nina said numerous articles. I counted, it's like 475 articles over the span of his career. It's insane. Not only that, the number of books that he published, numerous on the topic of gender and sexuality and masculinity studies. But also I compiled my notes just out of curiosity I took classes with him 3 years, 2012 to 2015 during my PhD coursework. Just out of curiosity, I'll compile all my notes from my classes, 6 classes, and I had 130 pages single-spaced of notes from his classes. So that just gives you, it's a testament of his knowledge of Latin American cultural studies, that it was endless. And he always had this muletilla that he would say in class, si mal no me acuerdo. He always said that. He repeated it several times, but I was like, oh, of course, he's going to say something like that if my memory serves me correct, right? So we always joked about that. But I had a chance to visit the exhibit, in the library in Hayden this morning, and one of the placards says "Pioneer in Cultural Studies," and really he was a pioneer in a lot of the things that he did, not just cultural studies, but in the subfields, right? I would argue here that he was a pioneer in queer theory, masculinity studies in the Latin American context. Personally, Foster, his bibliography is what I first consult when I'm writing on queer themes, masculinity, sexuality, and for the most part, I usually find that Foster's already written on the text that I'm writing on, right? So, but it's a great starting point. It always is a great starting point. It's what I assign to my students. It's always served as a guide to understanding concepts such as homosociality, homoaffectivity, heteronormativity, sexism, homophobia, and particularly how they're represented in cultural production. And it's not only that he was a great scholar in that sense within the classroom, and he left us with this enormous archive on these themes and topics, but I remember he was he engaged with the community. He fought for these historically marginalized communities outside of the classroom as well. I remember my last year of my PhD program, I had to drive him down, or he invited me to drive him down to Tucson, because he was serving as an expert witness in a trial, and I don't remember all the details, but from what I remember him being able to tell me, it was a gay Mexican man that was persecuted for his sexuality, something of the sorts. And I thought, man, so he's not only fighting for marginalized communities inside the classroom in his scholarship, but he went beyond the classroom to do so as well. And lastly, his office hours. I think everybody, some of us have already touched on this. His door was always open. Office hours weren't a thing. They were always 24/7. He was available. You would email him, email you immediate response in some cases. You could go to talk to him. When you walked into his office, He had a keen sense of humor too. You would look at his walls, and I was always fascinated with all the artwork he had. But they would always challenge these notions of these masculinist myths, for instance, or patriarchal dictatorial repression. I remember the Mafalda comic he had, "Este es el palito de apoyar ideologías," right? He also had the Che, the colorfully revised portrait by Alberto Corda, no? El Che Gay, that questioned the masculinist myths of the revolution. But also personally, since I had studied sport, he recognized and he challenged me to see that, soccer in particular was a masculinist institution in Latin America, particularly in Argentina and Brazil. And I think he always challenged me to look at the queer elements, to recognize the queer elements and comment on those as a way to kind of deconstruct those myths. So, his legacy lives on through us. And I think the hundreds, the scores of us that took his classes and scores of us that are in this room that took his courses, even though we're busy, I urge every one of you, especially if you're a teacher, professor, teaching Spanish, cultural production, Latin American culture in the classroom, leave your door open. You're to be there for your students. And I know Foster would be one of his dying wishes, is for his legacy to live on through us. To the importance and to continue to influence our students in the importance of language studies and cultural analysis, the importance of how to identify how cultural production serves to both embed and challenge dominant ideologies like patriarchy, heteronormativity, masculinist nationalism, among others, and to help our students think critically about the traditional notions of gender and sexuality. So I know I can assure you that would be one of his dying wishes. So thank you again.
Well, since Patrick acknowledged the exhibit that Chionate put together, may I ask you to, I thought Chionate was at the table. She's not here. Is Chionate actually in the audience? Okay, I think I confused somebody for a moment. My apologies. So, Ignacio Lopez Calvo from the University of California at Merced.
Thank you very much to Nina, Carmen, and all the organizers of this event. It is, of course, a true honor for me to participate in this homage to my dear friend and informal mentor. Maybe some of you don't know that you did not have to be David's student for him to be extremely generous. In fact, nobody in my entire career was as generous as he was. Especially at the beginning, I was nobody, from the beginning, everything I asked, he gave me double, an incredibly generous man. So I've been asked to talk about David's research on Latin American film, and of course, he had no less than 5 excellent books on Latin American film, so 5 minutes should be more than enough to talk about 5 books. So the first book is Contemporary Argentine Cinema. As you know, he was almost an honorary Argentine, published in '92, and he dealt with Argentine film since their return to democracy in 1983, focusing mostly on issues related to redemocratization, including abuse of power, authoritarianism, sexual rights, women issues, relationship between national history and current events, etc., etc. So David showed how the new democratic government of Argentina tried to promote redemocratization through the stimulation of film production, thus hoping to forge a new collective subjectivity. The outcome, he explains, was a series of films characterized by their socio-political themes and their analysis of recent Argentine history. As he does in all 5 books, here David looks at film as ideological texts, focusing on the relationship between film and society. His interest resides in how they contributed to an anti-fascist, never again, nunca jamás consciousness, breaking with the past, transcending military rule, and offering cultural resistance. David explains that through Argentine film between 1983 and 1990, although it was not experimental, it was indeed critical and self-reflective. It stimulated critical attitudes, a critique of history, and allegorical configurations that contrasted with traditional Hollywood commercial films. Some of these Argentine films also resorted to documentalism through the incorporation of narrative archival materials into the films. The second book, Gender and Society in Contemporary Brazilian Cinema, was from 1999, and it dealt mostly with issues of gender in Brazilian films since their return to democracy as well, this time in 1985. In particular, he focused on how gender survives as the basis of a socio-political allegory. The book is divided into 3 sections, dealing first with masculinism and the construction of masculinity, second, with feminism and the construction of the feminine, and third, same-sex positioning, gender disruption and transgression, and social power. David again looks at how films read socio-historical reality, looking at the film's semiotic and ideological organization. David is particularly interested in this case in how changes in Brazilian society were allegorized in filmographic gender narratives. According to him, the 2 greatest periods of internal support to film in Brazil were the Cinema Novo and the period of redemocratization, which was the focus of this book. The third book is Mexico City in Contemporary Mexican Cinema from 2001. As you can see, it took him 2 years to write another book and probably wrote several in between, which looks mostly at independent film from 1980 and how it got such amazing international acclaim. So lying at the intersection between film and urban studies, this book explores the international attention received by Mexican film during the 90s and their shift to urban studies. They are typically set in Mexico City, which becomes an integral part of the film's narrative and intervenes in the protagonist's experience. As the other books, there is a focus on gender in this one as well. The fourth book was Queer Issues in Contemporary Latin American Cinema, and David looks at Latin American film from the lens of queer studies, looking for an urban and continental understanding of sexuality. And so now queer issues are set in the city, including gender identity, homoerotic desire, sexual preference, homophobia, heteronormativity, homosexuality, and their socio-political interfaces, terms that, as Charles mentioned, he helped establish and coin. His queer reading of 14 key films as ideological narrative discourse shows how they promote an anti-heterosexist stance, how homophobia enforces the norms of heterosexuality, and how sometimes homosexuality becomes the smoke screen for homoerotic relationships. And the final book, the fifth book, is Latin American documentary filmmaking, major text, which it makes me laugh because in the previous book he said, I leave someone else to study documentary film, and then I guess he had the temptation and he wrote it himself. So it's divided also in 4 sections. The first one is titled Filming the Socially Absent, and he studies the role of the narrative nostalgia, metafilmic devices, and the femicides in Ciudad Juarez. The second section, titled Gender Trouble, studies gender issues in the US director Helen Solberg's The Double Day, and queer issues and gender dissonance in Cuban documentaries. The third section explores Raimundo Glacier's contest, how he contests the revolution in Mexico. And the fourth studies privilege, spectatorship, metonymic discourse, and film as socio-historical Bildungsroman. So as we have seen, all 5 books of Latin American film have in common David's interest in culture studies, urban studies, gender and queer studies, and the analysis of the semiotic and ideological organization of films, which he conceived as cultural documents that are socially meaningful and as ideological texts that help us read socio-historical reality. David will be dearly missed, of course, and he was, for me, an amazing role model, and I hope to be 1/3 of the academic he was. Thank you.
We will now hear from Sarah Sefchevitch, writer and researcher at the National Autonomous University of Mexico.
Agradezco a los organizadores de este homenaje por haberme invitado a participar. Es un honor muy grande para mí. Conocí a David cuando mi esposo Carlos Martínez Asad y yo fuimos invitados como profesores a ASU. Nos recibió con gran cordialidad y, generoso como era su costumbre, nos presentó a todo mundo, desde su adorable familia hasta los colegas y alumnos que nos invitaron y ayudaron durante nuestras 2 estancias. Desde entonces nació una amistad que perduró hasta el día de su para mí inesperada muerte. Luego nos vimos en la Ciudad de México y la última vez que nos vimos fue aquí en Arizona, cuando me invitó a conferenciar para sus alumnos y me alojó en su departamento en el centro de Phoenix. Entre los muchísimos temas que le interesaban a David, hubo varios que me acercaron a él: mujeres, judaísmo, y que acercaron a mi esposo a él: cine, fotografía, ciudades, pero el principal fue siempre el de la literatura mexicana. David conocía muchas literaturas, pero la argentina, la brasileña y la mexicana fueron sus preferidas. De ellas conocía las tendencias, las obras, los autores, pero lo que a mi parecer lo hacía un excelente estudioso, algo absolutamente excepcional, es el enfoque que usaba. Cito: no se puede entender la producción de una sociedad sin profundizar en aquella sociedad. De hecho, hay una relación dialéctica entre la sociedad y su producción cultural, dijo en una entrevista. Me interesa entender más la sociedad que estudiar los textos en sí, lo cual no quiere decir que no me interesen los textos, dijo también. Y en su libro Mexican Literature es muy claro, cito de varias páginas: hay que entender a los textos en términos de las múltiples, complejas coordenadas de su producción. Hay que examinar la literatura como parte de unas manifestaciones sociohistóricas más amplias. Hay que entender a la literatura como parte de la dinámica cultural de un país. A partir de ese modo de entender las cosas, David buscaba lo que llamaba Significant Literary Production, es decir, los mares de la significación, como dijera poéticamente Juan Bruce Novoa. Y buscaba entender a los escritores, menos como autores de obras sueltas y más como creadores de proyectos culturales integrales. Buscaba además revisar continuamente el canon, al que consideraba, y esto es algo excepcional en el modo de pensar académico, como en eterna reconsideración y reformulación para cambiar los criterios y para incluir a autores y obras diferentes. Y es que David, el investigador, el profesor, tenía muy claro que el trabajo intelectual es un continuo proceso de refundación. Este modo suyo de pensar, de estudiar y de interpretar, de continuamente repensar, reestudiar y reinterpretar, fue una gran lección para muchos de nosotros. Lo otro que David nos enseñó, algo también excepcional en la academia, es que para nuestro trabajo debemos aprovechar, cito, todas las fuentes posibles. Y cuando él decía todas las fuentes se refería a eso, a todas. Sus compilaciones sobre el caso mexicano al que me refiero hoy, pero también sobre todos los otros casos, desde Perú hasta España, desde Chile hasta la literatura chicana, apuntan a eso. Pues David no solo compilaba estudios para miradas panorámicas que permitieran conocer y entender alguna literatura en particular. Ya hablé de su libro Mexican Literature de 1992, que reúne ensayos de primerísima calidad sobre la historia de la literatura mexicana con interpretaciones aún vigentes, sino que compilaba también bibliografías fundamentales para conocer esas literaturas. Además de la que aparece en este libro que mencioné, menciono aquí su Historiografía de la Cultura Mexicana, Ensayos y Comentarios de 1997. Y no solo eso, compilaba bibliografías secundarias como su Mexican Literature, A Bibliography of Secondary Sources, publicado en 1981. Como devoto que era de la literatura, David escribió muchísimos artículos y reseñas, hizo traducciones, participó en conferencias, foros y encuentros, además de impartir sus cursos, pues estaba pendiente y enterado de todo lo que se publicaba. Sé que me gustaría decir muchas cosas más de David y mucho agradecerle, pero mi tiempo asignado para hablar se termina. Quiero solamente contar esto. Aún conservo los últimos mails que cruzamos muy poco antes de su partida. El 15 de junio del 2020 le escribí para saludarlo. Ya estábamos en plena pandemia y esa misma noche me respondió contándome que había estado muy enfermo, pero me aseguró que ya estaba bien y me contó sus planes para viajar y preparar libros. Su mail terminaba con estas palabras, cito, como dice la canción inglesa de la Segunda Guerra Mundial, "We'll meet again sometime, somewhere". Así es, querido David.
And now Denise Araújo, Universidade Tuiuti do Paraná.
Dear Carmen, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of David William Foster's memorial. This is my tribute to him. I will share the screen now. Querido Foster, estou escrevendo esta carta com meu coração e minhas memórias, agradecendo seu interesse no Brasil. Quando você veio à Universidade Federal do Paraná pela primeira vez, em 1986, e começou a nos dar aulas, fizemos um pacto. Você daria suas aulas em inglês e nós falaríamos em português com você depois das aulas. Para manter nosso pacto, esta carta está em inglês e estou falando com você em português. Você e nós quatro, Cristina Fukushima, Lígia Vieira, Joe Bonilauri e eu visitamos museus e lugares interessantes em contrapartida pelo seu enfoque cultural sobre os Estados Unidos. Aqui estamos nós. Na primeira foto, eu, Lígia e Cristina. Na segunda foto, Cristina, eu, Joe e você, Foster. Depois de sua disciplina, eu decidi fazer meu mestrado em cinema na ASU, universidade onde você passou a maior parte de sua vida acadêmica pesquisando a cultura latino-americana. Eu amei a ASU e agradeço por ter sugerido Nicholas Salerno como meu orientador. Ele foi entrevistador de Woody Allen e minha pesquisa foi sobre o filme Annie Hall. Você também conheceu minha orientadora de PhD, Marguerite Waller, da Universidade of California, Riverside. Aqui estão Woody Allen e Nicholas Salerno, Ana, Marguerite Waller, Hugh Foster e eu. Nos anos seguintes, você continuou vindo a Curitiba como professor convidado no programa de mestrado e doutorado em Comunicação e Linguagens da UTP, Universidade Tuiuti do Paraná, e como amigo, ansioso por compartilhar conosco seus conhecimentos e para entender melhor a cultura brasileira. Clarice Dio e Elizabeth Larson também vieram a Curitiba, com alunos da ASU para conhecer Jaime Lerner, prefeito de Curitiba e governador do Paraná, que implementou o ônibus biarticulado, incentivou áreas verdes, fez os primeiros esforços para a reciclagem e criou novos espaços em Curitiba, como a Ópera do Arame, o Jardim Botânico e a Rua 24 Horas. Aqui estamos nós. Elizabeth, Clarice e eu, com Jaime Lerner, e depois na ASU, quando você me convidou para apresentar a mostra de cinema Curta BR na sua universidade ASU. Então, Elizabeth e Jaime Lerner, eu, Jaime Lerner e Clarice, Clarice, Hamilton, eu e você, Foster. Você veio a Curitiba pela última vez em 2019 e foi membro do painel de debate do Animatiba, Festival de Animação no Cine Passeio, que recriou 2 dos antigos cinemas de rua de Curitiba. Aqui está você, em suas últimas fotos conosco. você, Foster, eu e Alexandre. Cristina, você, Foster e eu. Você, querido Foster, e eu. Um dia, durante uma de suas aulas na Universidade de Tuiuti do Paraná, você disse que nunca iria parar de ensinar e pesquisar. E você manteve sua promessa. Você publicou muitos livros e eu recebi um e-mail anunciando seu novo livro 3 semanas antes de seu falecimento. Aqui está a capa de seu último livro, e é sobre São Paulo. A cidade como texto fotográfico, documentário urbano, fotografia de São Paulo, em 3 de junho de 2020. Agora é hora de terminar esta carta. Quero dizer a você que você faleceu em 24 de junho de 2020, mas deixou muitas memórias que estarão conosco para sempre. Vamos fazer um brinde para celebrar suas memórias preciosas. Tchim, tchim. Obrigada. Obrigada. E aqui está minhas informações, meu contato. So here you have my contact, my email, my phone number. It's very emotional. Thank you for your attention and for organizing Foster's memorial. He deserved it. Please accept my best Brazilian wishes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And now, writer and journalist John Talton.
Soon after I became a columnist for the Arizona Republic in 2000, I was invited to speak to Professor Foster's class at ASU on the history of Phoenix. And I'm a 4th generation Phoenician and wrote a lot about Phoenix history for the Republic. And it turned out to be the beginning of a great friendship, because in addition to being a man who was so conversant in great cities like Rio and Sao Paulo, he was terribly interested in the history of Phoenix and the culture and media of Phoenix. He wrote about it, he studied it, he photographed it, he had a passion for it. He came from Seattle, from working class roots. Seattle was not the city when he was born that it's become today, a superstar. It was a working class city. And he worked his way through the University of Washington with his brains and his talent. And then he landed at ASU in 1966, just 8 years after it became a university. And his stature grew in no small part because of his scholarship, his engagement in Latin America, and his many, many wonderful books and papers. But he never lost his passion for Phoenix and for the city that he lived in. He landed in a city that was so different than today. It was a city that was the center of an agricultural empire, and it had beautiful center city neighborhoods that are still there. It was where he lived, and it was where I lived too. And he preserved this love with his students with a condominium near downtown that he set up an urban lab so they could experience downtown and what it was like in old Phoenix before it became cookie cutter houses and tiki-tack roofs and almost all of the citrus groves and flower gardens gone. He never lost that love, and he never lost that interest. He was a true Renaissance man, a gentleman and a scholar, and such a dear friend. Until we meet again, David.
And now Stella Pope Duarte, writer and community activist in the Valley in Arizona.
tardes. Buenas tardes. ¿Me escuchan bien? Okay. 2.5 months I had the back surgery. If my surgeon could see me now. Pero él vive en Camelback Mountain, muy forondo. Y yo estoy aquí con ustedes. And this is where I want to be. So I'm not too good with the cane y todo, but I'm getting stronger. I don't have any more pain. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon a todos. Y a la familia Foster, I want to say what David told me about Virginia. Me dijo, es una ángel. Y de su hijo, David Raúl, me dijo, gané la lotería con mi hijo, David. So, esas son unas cosas wow, ¿verdad? De familia. And so, gracias a los Fosters and everyone who had anything to do with this event. Okay? And this afternoon, indeed, it is a pleasure to be here with you and to share my thoughts on David William Foster, who was my precious mentor and my beloved friend. And in those two roles, he helped me with my faltering steps as a writer. I remember the call I got from New York City. Maybe I can see better without my glasses. Okay, maybe I'm better with that. I remember the call I got from a New York Times reporter when my novel, Let Their Spirits Dance, was the subject of a bidding war between 17 top publishing houses in New York City. He wanted to know who I was. Well, to tell you the truth, I didn't know who I was. It's funny how we bypass ourselves in life. Sometimes we look to the things we do and miss the things we are. So the first question from the New York Times reporter, are you Latina? And instantly my reaction was, válgame Dios, which I think translated, Alberto, might mean, oh my God, here we go again. So I said to him, yes, I am Latina, I am Mexican, Mexican American, Irish through my Tata Pope, French through my dad's bloodline, and a Chicana. But you know what else I am, I told him? I'm an American author. When are you going to stop doing this to us? When, in other words, are you going to stop saying, this is your literature, right here, in this pigeonhole, and this is our literature, alphabetized. So guess what? They quoted me in the New York Times as saying, I'm an American author. When are you going to stop doing this to us? So Dr. David Foster was one of the reasons I was able to even answer the question about my ethnicity. You see, it took many years for me to truly feel pride in my heritage and in my legacy. Dr. Foster extensively explored the complex populations of Phoenix and in numerous other cities as well. His documentation told everything of what was going on at so many levels. He even went to my own little barrio, La Sonoridita Barrio in South Phoenix, to do his research. And the one thing I remember about my little barrio was a TV show that they showed, La Casa de la Chuca, and everybody had a nickname. Y el Cabezón, the whole thing. Everybody's houses. And then they said, This is one of the worst slum areas in Phoenix. Válgame Dios. And I was a child. You can imagine what that did to me. I lived there. So it made me ashamed. It made me ashamed of who I was. It made me ashamed of the language I spoke. I was given demerits in school for speaking Spanish. And here, Dr. David Foster went to where I was born. And with his research, he instantly gave my little barrio status and worth. And I am so grateful to him for that. He was a true mentor and friend, taking me under his wing, as I know he has many of you. Always patient with me and my strange thoughts and questions. Very, very patient. And then I began to have pride in who I was. In Chicanismo, I was able to have pride in the hidden meanings of poverty and in the flamboyant expressions of love. I looked inside myself and led myself not to be afraid of my ancient ancestors, los Mexicas, which are also known as the Aztec. And if you take away the M-E, you have the word Chicanos, which in the ancient days was a soft sound, Chicanos. And then in the Southwest, it became a Chicanos. That's why when, the harder sound. That's why when somebody's learning, a Spanish speaker is learning, he'll say to you, may I sit over here in this chair? Because the SH sound is still inside our minds. Okay. So with Dr. Foster and the way he explored our populations in Phoenix, I was able to understand what is my heritage and what is my legacy. And as a global scholar, Dr. David Foster brought new meanings, not only to us in the US, but throughout the world. I would like to end with the words of Khalil Gibran, the prophet of Lebanon. And these are his words. And my heart walked toward knowledge, the daughter of love and beauty, and said, bestow upon me wisdom that I might share it with the people. And she responded, say not wisdom, but rather fortune. For real fortune comes not from outside, but begins in the holy of holies of life. Share of thyself with the people. And that is exactly what Dr. David William Foster did. He shared himself with the people, with us. Muchísimas gracias, my precious mentor and beloved friend. Gracias.
Now, Jorge Valdivieso, Emeritus of the Thunderbird School of Global Management and also a former student of David's.
Good afternoon. I thank Professor Rios for giving me this opportunity to participate in the celebration of Professor David William Foster. For many years past, in the month of September, two important events took place in Phoenix. First, the reception that the Foster's family offered in their residence to celebrate David's birthdays. The elegant surroundings were a perfect match to the delicious food served and the international spirits we all enjoyed. But above all, the Foster's hospitality made this event a meeting of writers, lawyers, doctors, playwrights, presidents of universities, and of course, brilliant AU's graduate students. It was indeed a gathering of humanists. But I'm not going to talk about that great event. What I want to talk and share with you today is my story about a more intimate gathering, like a family reunion that year after year took place. David kindly accepted our invitation from Teresita and myself to have lunch together to celebrate his birthday. David chose the place and the date, and we enjoyed David's company. His keen insights about every subject, even the most casual conversation with him, was a challenging, stimulating, and illuminating experience. We had our last lunch, only the two of us, because Teresita had passed away, in September 2017 at the University Club. As usual, David ordered a milanesa de ternera and a glass of red wine. I enjoyed my langostinos al jerez with linguine and a glass of Pinot Grigio. And we talked about everything: politics, literature, religion, philosophy, his scholarly projects, his publications. But for David, the most important topic of conversation was his former students. He remembered all of them by name: Landeira, Jara, Reis, Mais, Urioste, Lindstrom, Peña, Altamiranda, Mellinger, Oropesa, Lockhart, Heirola, etc., etc., etc. Their accomplishments made him happy, and their personal difficulties caused him deep pain. It was then, in our last meeting, that David reminded me that the literary community all over the world was commemorating the 20th anniversary of Octavio Paz's death. Before we said goodbye, David, in his characteristic soft porteño accent, said to me, "Ahora, Che, vos tenés que publicar tu libro sobre paz." I smiled and said, "Quizá." Yet, that is how the idea of publishing Signos, Símbolos y Alegorías was born. Signos, Símbolos y Alegorías is my book dedicated to David William Foster. I had planned to present it to him on the occasion of his 80th birthday. It was supposed to be my gift, my present to David, the great man we all cherish. I took countless courses with him. He was the head of my graduate committee, and he directed my doctoral dissertation on Octavio Paz. Signos, Símbolos y Alegorías is indeed my recognition to an outstanding human being who was and will always be my teacher, my mentor, my guide, and above all, my dear friend. Rest in peace, my dear friend, until we met again. This is what I say about David Foster in the foreword of my book. Le expreso a David Foster mi imperecedera gratitud porque su erudición de maestro me abrió las puertas al campo de la lingüística, la semiología y la historiografía, porque sus consejos de mentor me endilgaron por el recto camino para que no me extraviara en el jardín de los senderos que se bifurcan, porque su sabiduría impidió que me perdiera en la región más transparente de la investigación académica, pero sobre todo porque su sinceridad de amigo hizo que siempre brotara de sus labios la palabra cálida y precisa para que no me faltasen ese consejo y esa ayuda necesarios para encontrar la salida del laberinto de la soledad en el que tantas veces nos encontramos en la vida. Sadly, David is no longer with us. I take that back. He is and will forever be present in our minds and in our hearts. Yet, since I cannot give my book to him physically, I will put Signos, Símbolos y Alegorías in the hands of two people, of the two people David loved and will always love the most, Virginia and David Raúl. So, my dear Virginia and my dear David Raúl, in celebration of David's 80th birthday, I present to you Signos, Símbolos y Alegorías as a token of my love and my gratitude for what David did for me. Thank you.
And now, former ASU President Laddie Kaur.
I was pleased about 2 weeks ago when someone in this room says, we would really like to know what you'd do with respect to the wonderful activities going on. When I came back to ASU, having been away a little bit, a few decades, I found such power in David Foster. It was a set of steps that made him in my view, quite strong. It's in the data where it shows the 50 book length publication, but particularly in pressing harder, not only on Espanol around, but women's places and LGBTQ. 50. What I got interested in was how is he going to take that wider, and in many ways, and in my view, it stuck when he called me to come up to his top of a building, which was his place to do work. I had a chance to talk a bit about, well, if you have this much going, how can you do more and be more? I had been talking with him as we flew from the upper part of Egypt to Romaine. He said, this is something I would like to start to see. What is it? How does it work? In terms of the Romanian, the factors as they were there. So we kind of play with it a little bit. Never quite got through with it, and I'm deeply sorry for that. But it opens the door, in my view, to many of the pleas that were put here today, as to bring all of the languages and all of the projects into some place where it is. I feel the place that you'll see that here, but it is not quite as easy to do in terms of the work that's being done. I'm impressed with you. I don't know, I've not been in this meeting before, and I would welcome talking with you, and would say I think it is a very important thing in the future of Arizona State. Thank you.
And for closing remarks, David Raoul Foster.
Colegas y compañeros, my mother, Virginia, is overwhelmed and ever grateful for this outstanding and most touching memorial tribute to her beloved soulmate, Profe David. She sends huge hugs of appreciation for the insightful and caring tributes of each keynote speaker and to all of David's students present here today and watching online around the world. She hopes to visit with each of you at the reception or tomorrow at the fiesta at our hacienda. We have all been blessed to be surrounded by your love and support during these difficult days. Indeed, Profe David has transformed and enriched all of our lives. He is forever present with us. No words can capture how much we love, admire, and miss him. Now, Virginia especially wants to express deep appreciation to Professor Nina Berman, Director of Silk, for her leadership and support. She and all the professors and staff of Silk are a great asset to ASU. They have all worked so hard to plan and make this amazing event happen. Please applaud all of them. Gracias. On a personal note, I would like to leave you with the 3 things that Dad has instilled in all of us. And if you spent any time with him, you knew it. Watch Bugs Bunny. Everything you will need to know in life you can learn from Bugs Bunny. Watch it. Number 2, things are not the way they say they are, and they're never going to tell you the way they really are. If you think about it, you realize how true that really is. And number 3, travel. But travel with your eyes open. You can walk the same streets 1,000 times and see something different. Every time we went to BA, we would walk the streets. And every time we found another kiosk or a new shop or a new restaurant. And it's because we didn't go with preconceived notions, even on the 1,000th trip he took down there. He had his eyes open, had his ears open. More importantly, had his taste buds open. He loved good food, bad scotch, and my mother. But more importantly, he loved to travel and share that experience with others. The number of students that went down on his trips, whether they were the National Endowment for the Humanities trips, or even from here, or the trips where he would take benefactors to go visit. He always said, travel with your eyes open. Yes, there are places you need to see, but go with your eyes open. So those are the 3 things I'd like to leave you with. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to Silk for this reception. And may you all be safe and enjoy as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everybody who participated and also who came to Phoenix to deliver comments. Thank you so much to all the out-of-town guests. And please stay around and enjoy some food and drink and meet one another and take this opportunity to connect. Thank you so much, everybody.